All right, y'all. All right. I want y'all to vibe out with me for a sec, but there will be spoilers if you have not seen Attack on Titan. Um, well, I'm gonna say that in short, I don't really think you're missing anything. However, I think the first season is quite good, and had the potential to be one of the greatest animes ever. But I'll get into that. And so I would say in that regard, if you want to get a sense, watch the first season at least, and then you can decide from there if you want to continue. Ah, let's go. Whenever I hear brand new guy, necked up, nigga. I've been down since birth. Backpack full So why am I playing that? Well, it was random, but I've been listening to Brand New Guy a lot. ASAP, Pretty Flacco. Like, again, this stuff was brilliant. I can't stress this enough, man. That theatrical, dark vibe that he had on some of these songs was just like fucking mind blowing, right? And taking from all kinds of different sources. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that gives your music character, right? Anyway, and of course, like, look, cartoons, anime are great sources. Video games are great sources of samples, right? Some of the greatest rap records have come from those sources. Anyway, we're talking about Attack on Titan. This to me is when the show peaked. Really. I loved the first season, or I should say, I loved the second half of the first season. But I want to get into this. Let me show you this first, because to me, I remember seeing this and I was just like, holy shit! For those of y'all who don't know about Attack on Titan, basically, people are in this village and all of a sudden Titans show up and it's like, what the fuck? And the way that they did that, by the way, in the first episode, the first half of that first episode, the way it starts is brilliant. There's a lot of brilliant shit in Attack on Titan, but unfortunately, I feel like it kind of went downhill. So, let's watch this together. This was great. So context, again, there's some of you who are going to be watching this who have never seen this, and I've told you spoilers. But what's interesting about this is, in this particular episode, this is the first time we see a female Titan, period, which I thought was really brilliant. Like, it's because all the Titans you see before that are male. You don't really think about it. Number one. Number two, this is a sentient being, right? Because the first time you look at these Titans, you're like, okay, they're just sort of they don't really have a mind, if that makes sense. They seem more mindless and they're just there to eat and and cause and fuck shit up. But here's this female Titan who's like mad fucking fast and is clearly not just fast, but like deadly, like a real thinker. And that shit's scary as fuck. You're already afraid of the Titans before this. And then to add that element on top of that, I thought was brilliant. And it reminded me, it's very Terminator-like. But again, this is what I love about what the Japanese do. They pay attention to everything. They pay attention to everybody, or mostly, I would say, Western media. And they take things, but they flip it. Because that's what this hip-hop shit is about. You borrow, you look at stuff and you go, that's kind of fucking interesting. What if I did this and flip it? You don't just present it again, you flip it. So you take, robot killer, chaser type, and then you flip it into Titan mech, human in flesh, that kind of shit. It's in a completely different context. And that's scary as fuck. Imagine someone who's like a robot that's somewhat your height. That's already scary. But now that they're a fucking Titan and like 50 meters tall, that's some bullshit. Anyway, enough preamble. But I thought that this is where really the first season was by far the strongest for this reason. Again, so they have no idea. They know she's around somewhere, right? Because in this episode, she showed up and fucked shit up. Everyone's like, what the fuck? So they know she's around, but they don't know where, right? And that horror element I thought was brilliant. And it's really only in the first season that you kind of see it done that well. Partly because we don't know shit about the Titans. So that's why it works. それが姿を現すとしたら一瞬だ This is great. This is great. The music. Mm. Bow. Damn. This is amazing. That's incredible. That shit was when I was like, this is great action. Whoa, nigga! This is crazy. This was great. They're like, huh? Yeah, this is brilliant. Um, so yes, this was actually to this day my favorite part of the entire series. And actually, when I had talked about this in my Sinners video, well, let me bring that up because people, some people were like, "What the fuck?" I mean, I had to keep it real about Sinners. I'm not impressed by a lot of the shit that y'all make because, frankly, people make impressive shit. Outside of, it's not just the United States. Obviously, people in the United States make impressive shit, but like, I don't have to like weak shit. I don't understand this era. People feel like they're forced to like weak shit. I don't. If I don't like it, I don't like it. So I had talked about Attack on Titan in this video of mine, talking about Sinners, this weak ass movie. But the point is, Attack on Titan is actually, it starts off brilliant in a way, and it promises something brilliant. But like I said, I found that it was really a bait and switch, and this is what I didn't. I found myself giving less of a fuck as the seasons went along, because really at its core, it's like a standard war story about warring factions with supernatural titans, which is a little bit boring as a premise actually. Now, initially when it starts off, you're like, oh my god, who are these titans, right? There's so much mystery, and that mystery is great. There's horror and mystery, and that shit goes together really, really well. Okay? And it's just sort of this military story, and you're like, this is great, right? I can just picture it. If those, like, I'm hanging out today, I'm just living my life, and all of a sudden a giant shows up. You're like, what the fuck? Right? And at first, and then even the way that they had the 3D maneuvering advice and that we're climbing, it's like Spider-Man, and it's like, they were mixing Spider-Man and Gulliver's Travels. I don't know if you're all familiar with Gulliver's Travels. But I'm pretty sure this was the one where it was people versus giants and shit, right? So again, like, this is the kind of stuff, again, for those of y'all, by the way, black creatives who are making stuff, if you're trying to make anime, like, you really got to know your shit, okay? Like, the reason why a lot of our stuff is mad weak from some of the newer entrants is that you can tell these people are not well read, right? And their influences are very minimal. They watch the same shit everyone watches, and they don't really think beyond what is right in front of them. And the great artists, the great writers, they think about multiple things. Okay? They're familiar with multiple things. This is why when I saw this shit, I was like, oh my god, they're mixing Spider-Man, Gulliver's Travels, Full Metal Alchemist. Like, this shit's fucking crazy. Anyway, so to come back to what I was saying about Attack on Titan, when I found that the show had this sort of like personality, schizophrenia of sorts. I wasn't sure if it wanted to be like this sort of mystical fantasy story or just like convoluted war drama. And I thought that the mix of the two didn't work, right? Because war is very real, right? And fantasy is fantasy, right? Now, let me get into that because the truth is the magic system is just too complex in Attack on Titan, and it doesn't all connect. Like you'll be watching something and then they'll introduce something new about the Titans just by someone saying it. And you're like, yeah, but that wasn't weaved into the story, right? Stuff is like now, this is getting into sort of the weeds of things. But I would argue that there's really let's say a scale of what when it comes to fantasy stuff or sci-fi stuff of the kind of magic system or what you want to add, okay? So on one hand here, let's say this is magic, all the way magic, and here this is all the way tech, okay? And in the middle you have magitech, okay? Now, in my honest opinion, the best shows, the best stuff is kind of either on this side or somewhere on this side, meaning that you can go between magic and magitech, and that's fine. People are fine with that. And you can go between tech and magitech, and that's fine. I mean, you could argue that pretty much any sci-fi film that you've ever seen, a lot of it is basically magitech, right? We don't have spaceships and we don't have energy blasters and all that kind of shit. It's magitech, right? Magic and tech. But the point is that you can't go from tech all the way to magic all of a sudden because that's distracting. And this is what I saw in Attack on Titan like all the time. In fact, at first you don't see it because you think, okay, there's the Titans. There must be some sort of like biological explanation for how they're there or something. But once you see Eren turn into a Titan magically, because it's magic, it's literal magic. There is no scientific explanation for how he's able to even turn into a Titan, really. Where how does he have that spontaneous growth all of a sudden? And how does he grow into it and then he can disconnect from this thing that he's just created? It's like it's pure magic. And this is my problem. The show starts off with having all this great like tech stuff, or you could even say borderline magitech stuff with the 3D maneuvering device, which I thought was brilliant. Even the walls and all this kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden it just becomes magical, and you're like, what the fuck? Um, and then even when it's magical, there's still Titan serum. So it's like, okay, so we've jumped from magic back to like magitech, where there's like a serum. What? So the serum stimulates the growth. How exactly? Does that make sense? And it's the Titans or pure Titans can be activated. Let's say the Founder Titan can just activate pure Titans by screams. Like, huh? And this is where I found Attack on Titan started to lose me. Again, the magic system just wasn't coherent. It's not like Fullmetal Alchemist. That's a very coherent magical system, right? You'll notice that in Fullmetal Alchemist, it's magic and it's magitech, right? Like the automail that Ed uses is magitech, let's say, to a certain extent, right? But it's very magic. It's magic and tech, and that's kind of where it ends, right? It's not. Now you'll notice that in FMA, and I'm using the anime as an example, the one part that people go, oh, like if you really were paying attention, you'll notice there's a part where I think his name's Kimberly. He kind of comes back as a cyborg, and Kimberly. Let's see. Yeah, Full Metal Alchemist. Was he? Here, sorry, I spelled cyborg wrong. Yeah, he kind of comes back as this like, I'm sorry, why is he a cyborg? That's a great ass question. That's literally what everyone says, right? But this is the reason. Now you're getting into like real deep magitech, borderline tech. It's too far. And these are kind of things you have to, as a writer, like, you notice certain things like this, right? It's just too far. You're talking about a magic system. Alchemy is magic. Magitech, they always play with that sort of magic tech, magic chemistry thing going on, which is dope. But now that a person is a cyborg, especially in an era where we're talking about 19, I think that it was sort of like the early 1900s, late 1800s, right? It's like cyborg, what? Okay, you've gone too far. So this is something Now, FMA just barely does this, but Attack on Titan crosses this line constantly, and it became extraordinarily distracting. The other issue I had was in the second season, you started to have these stories about the fake king and stuff, and I thought all that stuff was complete bullshit. It made no sense. It was boring. Um, it was convoluted, and in hindsight, doesn't matter. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, does it really matter? Like, yes, okay, you find out that, okay, we find a real person and we find out that there's some sort of royalty that had this demon pact or whatever. Again, magic right out of nowhere. But they could have just gone to that faster. We didn't need all that fake king shit. It's literal padding. And this is another issue I had with Attack on Titan. It just felt like so many of these episodes were just padding. Um, Now, what's another thing I would have liked to point it out? I think that, you know, one of the great aspects of horror movies, they call it the uncanny, is when you don't know what's going on. I mean, that's really where horror wins. Because there are times where things are happening and you're like, what the fuck is happening right now? What, like, you don't know what's happening. Like, you, or I should say, you know what's happening, but you don't know why what's happening. And that's where horror works. It's in the uncanny, right? They call that the uncanny. But the truth is that for horror to work, it can't really be complex and uncanny at the same time, if that makes sense, right? It has to be simple, right? So, like, if I'm in my house and, you know, a beast shows up, a literal beast, I'm like, oh my God, what the fuck? Like, how does, like, they're beasts? Beasts exist, right? But it can't be like, and then the beast, you know, as the story goes along, we find out that the beast is actually a creation of a scientist. And when the scientist was creating, there was a whole slew of these beasts. But then the beasts can transform into people, and then the people sometimes they take a serum and like they're not beasts. And then there's a faraway land. Now it's too complex, and the horror element is gone, and it's turned into something else. Okay, so the point is that if you build on something, then you're removing the uncanny aspect of it, and you're showing that there is in fact a system. And part of what makes uncanny is we don't know how this works, right? So again, you're removing the horror, and I found that that was what was going on with Attack on Titan, and why really it kind of peaked in the first season, because the first season is really horror based in a great way. Even the way like they had some of the scenes, like I remember there was one particular moment where I think it was Eren actually who was trying to, like, he was using the 3D device. He was flying through the city, and then this Titan just comes out of nowhere with this giant mouth and tries to snap at him, and it's like, right? Like stuff like that. You didn't really see that after the first season. That's the horror element. Um, the other thing I thought was the backstory of how the first war started was really convoluted to me. And then once you had started introducing memory erasure, again, this is stuff that memory erasure is magical, right? Like it's not like it was done in a scientific way. It was just like it's just too much, right? Fake heroes, and then what really kills Attack on Titan to me is the weak story that requires padding, and that's when you start to get the melodramatic aspects. You get these forced emotional moments that ring hollow because everyone's emo, everyone's weepy. You know, like that time we were at the forest, and that time we wanted to see the ocean. And you're like, man, just get to the fucking point. And then you had subsequent seasons where they would do these timeline jumps, right? Like, you guys know what I'm talking about. All of a sudden, season 3 starts, 3 years later, and then season 4 starts 10 years later. But in the middle of an episode, then it'll go back to 4 years before, and you're like, what is this shit, man? I mean, there's a lot of these things that I just found from a storytelling perspective didn't work. I mean, they spent so much time in the first season or two trying to plug the hole, pause in the in the wall. It was just like, this is not important. Like, it's just not that interesting. It's kind of a boring obstacle, and like something like that should be achieved fairly quickly. And they dwelt on the fact that human beings were being created from titans. I found that really interesting that they kind of dwelled on that, because it was pretty obvious once you saw that human beings could turn into titans. It's kind of very obvious that human beings could be created into titans. and I just seen like it just took too long to get to that. At some point, they treated it as some grand reveal. I feel like it was like season three or something like, or end of season two, and I'm like, man, I've been figured this shit out. Like, kind of, this is kind of obvious. Um, so long story short, I didn't. I could say a lot. I don't know if you want me to go into every single detail, but I really did think that it's a show that really lost its way. Now, does it have moments in season two, three, and four that are cool? Of course, there's some great action moments in the subsequent seasons as well. The and even just some like that sucks. Like when the I forget his name, and a lot of forgettable characters, respectfully. But one of the leaders was charging with his squad, and they're charging towards the Beast Titan. And the Beast Titan is throwing these boulders, and he's just murking them. Like that stuff was painful to watch. There's some great action, and then in the third season when they introduced, and I found again this is when Attack on Titan started to get its footing back. Is like when they started to keep again back to tech. In the third season they introduced the almost a 3D maneuvering device, but with guns this time, and so that the fight sequences or shootout sequences that occurred with that I thought were quite well animated. Again, when Attack on Titan stays in that world, to me that's when it shines. When it starts to veer off into fantasy land with Ymir and the demon and the demon realm and all the stuff, you're like, this shit is like, this was not thought out well enough, right? It's just too convoluted. Um, you know, there's just too much magic, and it's not clear how it all works. And at the end of the day, um, that's usually how stories, especially like fantastical sci-fi stories, can go downhill for real. Um, I want to see if there's anything else. I made some notes here. If there's anything else that I can really think of that I think are really important, but I think you get the idea of why I didn't really care for this. And of course, Iran being sort of like this. He wants to find out what's in his mother's basement, some dweeb destiny shit. But Iran was just too weepy and just crying all the time, and I just was like, this is not for me. Think about Full Metal Alchemist, and they're literal children, right? Like they were like 13. I think they were like 11 and 13, and they didn't even cry as much as Iran did. So, and Iran is like pretty much an adult or close to an adult, right? So, I will mention the one thing that I thought, again, this betrays basic science, right, or logic, is when Reiner transforms his consciousness to the rest of his body away from his head. That's retarded. I'm sorry. It's like people just kept making up rules on the go, like, Like when I saw it out, I was like, okay, this show has jumped the fucking shark. So yeah, that's that, man. I think there's a lot of shit in here that's like not very good. But I do like that I watched it. For y'all, if you've made it this far, I would say, and you're looking at the spoilers, check out the first season. I think the first season definitely has some promise, and ultimately, I am happy I watched it. And look, this is why I've always gravitated towards anime, in a sense, because anime they're focused on doing new things. It might not always work, but at least they're doing some new shit. And then when you will get moments like I didn't think AOT was great across the board necessarily, but I mean this chase scene is brilliant. This is better than anything in Sinners, right? Like I mean, at the end of the day, like there's imagination, there's it's well thought out, and so that's what anime is really good for. And I always respect people that go for it because it takes balls. I mean, look, I don't want to shit on like one movie all the time, but the point is that like it takes balls to do some new shit, okay? Because it's really hard to pull off. Almost anybody can do the same old shit that we've seen a million times, can say the same old thing we've seen a million times. It's boring. But for someone to do something new, that means they are taking that leap. And usually people that will do something that's actually unique, they will usually put in the effort to make sure that they execute it well enough, or at least well. Um, And of course, the greats, the geniuses are the ones where the execution is flawless, which is extraordinarily hard. But Attack on Titan, yeah, it started to get sloppy, and to me, it jumped the shark fairly early. I thought by season two, by the time it started getting to all the fake king stuff, it already jumped the shark. Respectfully, that's just my opinion. You tell me more. I'd love to know whether you loved it. My last thought, I will say this is, obviously my favorite season is season one. After that, I would say my favorite season. Hmm, it's a tough one. Maybe season three. Maybe two or three. I don't remember. Season four was dead last to me because by then I did not care and I literally was skipping stuff. I was just I was so burned out because I just found like the story was really had just completely fallen apart. Eren is not a villain. I thought that was really weird, and not um, again when you talk about just all of a sudden changing your premise, like not all of a sudden he's a villain now, and it's just like and his motivation was not well explained. How he became a villain and why really, like clearly. I mean, it's like all of a sudden by the end of the third episode, or sorry, I should say by the end of the third season, it's not like he's resolved to become a villain, right? Or you see him where you're like, yeah, this dude is on the edge. He's killed someone innocent, and has gone away with it. And he doesn't, and he's like, oh, this is great, or something like that. Like, he's just all of a sudden the villain in season four. I thought that was mad weak, and so, yeah. Long story short, not quite for me. But season one, excellent stuff. And on that note, I say peace.